Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name's Camille and today we're talking about magic. Specifically, I want to talk about something that's not in the general conversation, or at least something that I don't find that much in the general conversation when talking about magic. And that's this idea of making a magic system that's wholly unique. Now, I think that this is missing from the conversation mainly because it's not really recognized that anything's wholly unique nowadays. Everything's been done before, and especially when it comes to magic, a lot of these things are revamped, I guess. So are a lot of tropes and concepts in fantasy, but pertaining to magic, it's not real in our world. Follow me here on this. There are some people who, practice witchcraft and things like that. They have, Book of Shadows and crystal energies and rituals and things like this. But when it comes to creating magic, there is no real comparative that's talked about when creating magic and things like this. Now, there is a history, however, of folklore and ideas. And, this is Harry Potter. The magic system in Harry Potter is this hodgepodge of things in folklore and myth, the idea of using a wand, of casting spells, of magical creatures, of taking potions. All of these concepts are found in mythology, folklore, and all this sorts of stuff. And when people talk about making a magic system wholly unique, it never has anything to do with the base idea or the core idea of your magic system. Let's say, for example, there are dozens of works out there with elemental magic. This idea of, some person somewhere can innately wield water or fire or earth or what have you. And usually the conversation revolves around, well, you can make it unique by making the costs different, by making the limitations different. For example, every time you wield fire, someone in your family dies, or to access this magic, you have to go through some taxing ritual or pay a certain amount or something like this. And when it comes to talking about unique magic, no one ever discusses how to make the basic premise of this magic system wholly unique, because it's very difficult. And for me, whenever I create magic, that's what I want. I want to make not only a magic that is seemingly unique, but has multiple facets, has multiple things going on, but still exists in this realm of comprehension. It's still something that the reader can understand the rules of, kind of wrap their head around, yada, yada, yada. And, Brandon Sanderson talks about this. In Mistborn, he has characters who consume metals and then essentially can do things, telepathic things. It's basically telepathy, but with a different set dressing, I guess. And that's what I really want to dig into, is when we create fantasy worlds. I talked about this in my world building episode, but there's something comparative. I start with a baseline. Let's say I'm creating a fantasy world. I usually have something I'm basing it off of. An area in our world, a time, and what the technology level is like. So let's say I'm creating a fantasy world based on Victorian England, whatever. Then when I'm writing, I can research, were there showers? Is that part of the technology that was available during that time? And then that's an interesting bit of world building I can put into my fantasy world. But that's hard to find with magic if you're creating a magic not based on the Harry Potter scope, where, everything is pulled from all these different cultures and myths and folklore and then things like this. So for me, when it comes to magic, this is how I have been doing things lately when trying to create this multifaceted sort of magic. And it's, I treat it like a science or a technology. Now, follow me down this path. I'm not saying that your magic needs to be scientific in nature, but when you think about science, and I don't know really anything about science, but here we go. When you think about science, there are different paths one can take. There are different types of scientists, people who can go into chemistry or medicine or what have you. There's math involved and observation and trial and error. There are things like journaling, experimentation, and in the general population, who actually understands the periodic table? Why is science used? And these are the types of questions that surround this field is this thing we're putting money into going to yield us more money? Is it going to make our lives easier? Is it going to help heal the sick? Is it going to be innovative and help us create something new that could do these other things like help the sick or make life easier, et cetera, et cetera. And it's the same in technology. Especially in, recent decades, technology has really taken a leap. And for a couple of reasons, one thing is some people study in technology to make others' lives easier. Some people do this thing just to see if it can be done, to help. But then there are other people in the population, for example, the older generations who, have trouble learning the newer technologies. There are people who have trouble relearning technologies. And I feel like a lot of the time with magic, it's very stagnant. It's one of those things that doesn't grow. So we're missing this idea of experimentation, of trial and error, of journaling and note-taking and teaching, although teaching is more common than these other ideas when it comes to magic and fantasy worlds. But magic can be very stagnant, number one. Number two is that I see magic a lot of the time in this role of, people use their magic for power or for something. It's not necessarily a day-to-day kind of thing where, I use my magic just, to do the dishes. And I have seen this before in Anne Bishop's Black Jewels trilogy, where the magic and the craft is part of day-to-day life. It's used to warm water for tea, etc. But it's not so common these days, especially in YA. I've been reading a lot of YA, either contemporary fantasy or urban fantasy. But, if there's magic in the world, it's nice to dig into, what does the general population, how do they use the magic? And so for comparative things, I guess, is when you look at your magic and you have your base, and what I mean by base is, like, for me, what inspired the magic system that I'm currently working on is I was watching Once Upon a Time a while ago, and it was the scene where Rumpelstiltskin was cutting his shadow away from his feet and sending his shadow to go do something. And I thought that would be a very interesting type of magic, people being able to tell their shadows to do things, send their shadows away. And is this concept wholly unique? No, because there have been shadow caster magic before. It is considered a form of, I think, telepathy, or having like some sort of kindred companion that can go out and do things for you, or like spirit magic where you send spirits out to go do things for you. But that was the concept, and yet it's not enough. So I had to take this magic and say, okay, what would be my comparative, and how do I make this a very vastly faceted magic system that's still comprehensible by the reader? And I said, well, I'm going to treat it like growing technology. It's a newer magic that people in this world are still studying. So I'm going to have areas of people experimenting, trial and error, taking notes, teaching, this kind of stuff. But then it comes down to, well, what exactly can this character who can wield their shadow do? What other parts of magic do I want involved in this system? And that's when we come to, comparative magic in history. There's absolutely nothing wrong with comparing your magic to historical ideas like J.K. Rowling did in Harry Potter. So looking at other cultures, myth, folklore, things that are considered true magic in our day and age. And Well, do I want these people to be casting spells to cast out their shadow? Do potions change how their shadow works? Are there incantations? Are there sacrifices involved? Is there a cost or a limitation to this form of telepathy? Are there any alchemical pieces or properties to this magic? And what other things can happen? And there's so many different forms of magic recognized in our world, whether it's, real life or just in fiction, but it's, there's necromancy and tarot and all these other things. But it's taking your base concept, that spark of motivation to create this thing, and finding something to compare it to. That's one of the things that makes world building very simple for me, is having something comparative to look to research through. And it's the same thing with magic. So another thing too is character. When it comes to magic, Avatar: The Last Airbender, you have Aang, who essentially specializes in all four of these elements. Like, he can wield all the elements. But to really get a sense of how the magic works, he has tutors and things that only specialize in one specific form of this elemental magic. And that's a good way to show these things to the reader, is to have one character who specializes in one specific facet of the magic, especially if it's the type of magic that you need the reader to understand the plot and so forth. So what does your character specialize in? What is their main focus, their main area of study, the one thing that they're really interested in? And who has access to this magic in this vast world, whether you're writing contemporary urban fantasy or high fantasy? Who has access? Does magic require knowledge or education like science would? Is there some innate amount of study that is required to access this magic? Who are the mentors and teachers? Is this an underground thing? Is this a widely known idea? Is this something that, your grandmother would teach you in the kitchen, like baking or cooking or something like this? And that comes back around to this comparative idea. Is this magic taboo, or is it so generally or widely accepted that it's something discussed, in public? Or is it something kept behind closed doors with only trusted companions? And then what's the setting? What is the setting? I just put that note kind of randomly with no explanation. Thank you, Pastor Camille. But, that comes back around to, is this a dystopia run by some overpowering dark force? Is this a kind of utopia where it's all good? And it's pulling in all of these threads together. And then it comes back around to character as always. Where is this character in this world? And then what tools and information does this character have access to? If magic is something that's very expensive in your world, then an impoverished character might not have access. They might have to steal these sorts of things, etc. And, the term treat magic like a science is thrown around a lot, and it's considered extremely vague because science is not vague. Science is this vast thing of stuff and areas of study and tools and the way that it exists in the world and influences things and produces questions. And that's what I mean by using science as a comparative tool when creating magic. What are the other pieces of your magic? How big is magic in this world? What sorts of questions are arising from it? How much do people have to study to understand it? How much math is involved? Money, time? What does trial and error look like? How does magic tie into medicine, into technology? And then why do people use it? What is important about this magic? Do people just want power and money? And that's such a common trope when it comes to magic, but You know, does the 85-year-old grandmother use magic to make cleaning her kitchen easier or to make cooking easier? Are there doctors in this world who, or some type of physician who utilize magic for healing? We'll take it a step further. What does that healing look like? Is it just telepathy? Is it just potions? Is it just, you know, aura-centric crystals? Or is it something more profound? Is it something that involves all of these pieces worked together? And then how important is all this information to your story? Do you need all of these pieces to make an interesting story, to make an interesting world? And only you can answer that question. For me, I could probably tell this story without going so in depth to the magic. But I want to create this magic. I want this crazy elaborate magic to be part of my world. But then it comes back around to, once you're actually drafting, don't info dump, don't throw it all into the book. Yeah, but it really comes down to comparative titles, you know, or comparative ideas when it comes to creating magic to make something wholly unique. What inspired you to create this magic? And then these are the questions that you want to ask to start putting the pieces together. And that is, of course, if you're making a hard magic, if you're making a magic that needs to be understood to understand the plot. Now, that's pretty much all I have today. Been super MIA again lately, I'm so sorry. But next week, I think I want to talk about first pages. I might actually be digging into some of my first pages from some of my books, just so that I can give you an idea of what to do and what not to do ever, because it doesn't work. So stay tuned for that. I'm going to be changing up my upload days for videos because my work schedule is just ridiculous and it keeps changing every week. So stay tuned for news. But for now, as always, you should be writing stuff and creating magic and asking questions.